All right, good morning, guys. Um, so I had some recording issues this morning when we were in the live lecture, so I'm just going to quickly post this video. At any point during this lecture, if you need to stop, just press pause, and you can go back and replay any sections that you're struggling with. But before we start, there are just a couple of things that I want to go over. I know I've sent out most of this in either a Google document spread or through email, or I've posted on Edmodo, but I really think it's important that we have all the resources that we need at our fingertips. So we're using Google Classrooms to facilitate online learning. Since we're not in the classroom, there's a link right there. It's classroom.google.com. Once you're there, here are the period codes down below. So you'll want to put these in depending on what period you're in. That'll give you access to the classroom. So I'll be uploading all of the lectures, all of the Google documents that you need, and the videos for those documents. So you can find all of them on Google Classroom. We are using Google Meet to facilitate our online lectures, so you can join live, and you can ask questions live. I'll be presenting the lecture as well. And so every day, guys, during during our lecture, you need to go to this link right here. It's an attendance link. I think you put your first name, last name, and student ID numbers in order to kind of let us know that you're there and that you've received the instruction that you need for that lesson. I'll also put this in another link that I'll post following this video. And then most importantly, if you have questions and you need help, there are a few ways to contact me. You can message me through Google Classroom. You can also hit me at my email address. I've got a district address here. It's dfelts@dallasisd.org. Or you can message me directly through Google Hangout. Google Hangout it's kind of like a live chat system, and it's instant messaging. You can send me a message and it'll pop up on my screen. Probably one of the better ways to reach me. Assignments and grading. So, guys, you have 2 days to complete an assignment. So, Monday, when we get together in the mornings, you're going to have the rest of Monday to take care of that assignment, and then you're going to have until 11:59 p.m. Tuesday as well. That's 2 days that you have to complete any assignment. So, again, you can find those lectures on Google Classroom. I'm going to put a post to the Classroom YouTube channel, and also um, I'm going to leave Edmodo as well, Edmodo links for those lessons as well. Um, oops. So late work, guys. Because I'm giving you 2 days to do this, you have time to get these assignments done. If you turn in something late, it's going to be 15 points a day. Okay. Um, at this point, guys, uh, you have virtual access, you have resources, videos, anything that you might need. You have me if you need help with any portion of the assignment, but it's going to be expected that you guys finish this in 2 days. I've got an example down here. It says Mr. Phelps is assigned a Reagan Domestic assignment on Monday. That's today, the 30th. I put the 20th. It's the 30th. I put the 21st. Looks like I'm still in vacation mode. Nope. Okay. So I'm assigned this assignment today on the 30th. It means that I have until the end of the day on Tuesday, the 31st, right? So that gives me Monday all day. So that gives me a day, and that gives me Tuesday all day as well. So you have 2 days to finish this assignment. If you turn it in on Wednesday, for example, it's going to be 15 points. If you turn it in Thursday, it's going to be 30 points. And then if you turn it in Friday, it'll be 45. So it's really important that you stay on top of your assignments. If you're confused, if you need help, reach out to me, and I will absolutely help you. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. Do now questions are from our last lecture. What is OPEC? We talked about that. It's an organization for countries that produce a specific product. If you don't know, I recommend that you Google search it. What is stagflation? Um, well, you're lucky. I put the answer right there. So stagflation is high inflation, high unemployment, and a bad economy. Those are the kind of the staple effects of stagflation. And you can tell when you have stagflation when all three of these are happening in your country. Why was President Carter popular? Why or why not? Think about the economy under Carter. Was the economy good? Was it bad? So let's look at this picture right here. This picture kind of tells us a few things that's going on during President Jimmy Carter's administration. Um, so if you need a moment, go ahead and pause this and you can do your do now questions, okay? For those of us who are finished, let's move on to Jimmy Carter. He's the 39th president. He's in office from 1977 until 1981. His presidency is marked by a few things. Generally speaking, when people think of Jimmy Carter, um, many people remember some of the poor economic conditions in the country at the time. Um, Basically, the United States helps Israel during a war, and as a result, OPEC, right? It's the um, it's the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, and many of these guys are in the Middle East. So whenever we decide to back Israel, they stop exporting oil to the United States. What this does is it causes shortage of oil and it kills the economy, and we have stagflation, right? The economic growth in the United States goes down, inflation goes up, and unemployment goes up. We also have shifting relationships in the Middle East. We had a really good relationship with Iran, and then Iran had a revolution, and it was replaced by a theocracy, which is a kind of a government that hinges on state religion, and so our relationship with Iran goes bad. As a result, when Reagan runs for office, right? Jimmy Carter's the president, but when Reagan is running for office, he's trying to beat Jimmy Carter. He really points out the economic situation in the United States. He tells Americans that the economy is really poor, that we've been suffering under the Carter administration, and so he uses this as a way to win the presidency. So if you go into Google Classrooms, if you click on this assignment, Reagan Domestic, um, under it there are two videos. One says Reagan, I think it's Reagan's speech, and the other one is Equal Rights Amendment. So right now, if you will select the Reagan video and watch that, go ahead and spend I think it's a minute long. Spend a minute watching it, and then we'll quickly go over the first question in I think it's the second section. Okay. So go ahead and pause it if you need a moment. Okay. So we skipped over section 1. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at section 1, okay? So section 1 says Community Reinvestment Act of 1977. So if you go to your Google Documents, it's going to be that first section. The reading says the process of redlining had prevented minorities from obtaining loans to buy houses in white neighborhoods. The purpose of the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977 was to help low-income minority areas obtain loans and credit. It was passed to reduce the discrimination in the credit and housing markets. Question number 1 says, which president passed this law? So what I would do is look at the year. It says the Act of 1977, and figure out which president is in office. Number 2, what is redlining and who did it hurt? So if you read the passage again, it tells you exactly what redlining is, and it kind of details what communities were affected by redlining. Number 3, why did the Community Reinvestment Act improve equality? What is the redlining? What does the Community Reinvestment Act do for people, specific communities? Who does it help, and why did it help with equality? So guys, go ahead and answer those questions. If you need a moment to pause, go ahead and pause the video now, and then we'll pick up on section 2. Okay, section 2. We just watched the Reagan video. So let's look at conservative movement in the second section. Let's read the paragraph here. It says the Heritage Foundation, the Moral Majority, and the National Rifle Association all represented a resurgence of conservatism in America in the 1980s. Some of their goals were to shrink the size of the federal government, promote family values, lower taxes to stimulate businesses, and strengthen the national defense. So we can answer question number one. It says, why did Reagan's speech appeal to Americans? Um, what does he say in his speech? Um, what sort of issues does he describe? Why do people why do they understand Reagan's speech, and why does it touch them when he talks about those subjects? So number two, what was one of the goals of the conservative movement in the 1980s? You can find that right in your reading. What was Ronald Reagan's plan to change this? So what was his plan? What was he going to do? So let's move on to Reagan's presidency. Okay, it's we're gonna go over a little bit of domestic policy for Reagan, and this will help you answer question number three. All right. So Reagan wins the 1980s election. He becomes the 40th president of the United States. His tenure in office is from 1981 to 1989, which means he was elected for 2 terms because when you're elected to four-year periods, right? So you get 2 terms, 4 years each. So Reagan Domestic. This was a quote from Reagan. We'll see this later in the slideshow. So I'm going to take that out real quick. So if we think back to the 1960s, this is the era where we see the hippies, right? Hippies rejected mainstream culture. During the 1950s, it was an era of conservatism, right? So the idea was that you get married, you have kids, you have the white picket fence, the house, right? Women are take care of the children, they stay home. Dad is the breadwinner, he goes to work, kids go to school. So it's like this picture perfect image of the American family, right? So one thing we start to see after the 50s, at the very beginning of the 60s, we actually see divorce rates in America skyrocket. Until the 1980s, and then after the 1980s you see it drop a little bit, but it's really during the 1960s that you start to see divorce rates rising. We also see welfare spending. So welfare are like social programs. We see those start to rise in the middle of the 1960s, and then during the Reagan administration, one of his things is cutting social welfare spending. So we don't add any more social welfare programs. Then after the administration ends, that goes back up. If you look at church attendance, Mass, I don't know how many of you go to Mass, but if you look at the number of Americans that are attending Mass in the mid 1950s to late 1950s, it's about 80% of Americans. 80% of Americans that are Catholic are attending Mass, and then after this, you start to see a decline of people attending Mass, right? So let's take a look at what President Reagan thinks about these trends, right? We see divorce rates rising, we see more social program spending, we see less people going to church. And what does Ronald Reagan think about this? He says our nation's internal problems are the direct result of her spiritual condition. Right living must be reestablished as an American way of life. Now is the time to begin calling America back to God, back to the Bible, back to morality. So really what's happening is Reagan sees America of the 1950s, and he really kind of wants to implement that during the 1980s, right? The idea is that we should go back to more conservative ideas. Life should be more focused around the family. We need to be focused more on our spirituality. In order for us to be a great nation, we have to go back to this kind of 1950s America, right? So under section 2, it says, okay, we read all 3 of those. So if you need to take a moment to answer those questions, take a second, pause the video, and finish question number 2 and 3. Okay. All right, we are now moving to section 3 in the Google Docs. If you look under Equal Rights Amendment, it's going to be the 3rd section in your Google Docs. It says Equal Rights Amendment, or ERA. Let's read the paragraph. It says the equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of gender. This amendment did not pass. It was supported by Betty Friedan. We talked about Betty Friedan. Betty Friedan was a social rights activist. Remember, there's a really famous book that comes out during the 1950s, and it basically talks about women's roles and how women shouldn't just be subjected to being housewives, and how many women have dreams and aspirations and things that they would like to do. So she was a feminist, and she was a vocal activist for um, women gaining legal and social equality. Um, so the amendment didn't pass. Betty Friedan supported it, but there was a woman named Phyllis Schlafly who challenged Betty Friedan. Phyllis Schlafly is one of the big reasons why the amendment doesn't pass. She is also a political activist and an author, and she opposes the equal rights pay. Or the Equal Rights Amendment. And the reason she does is because she believes it would reduce the rights of wives and harm family life, right? So what I want you to do is I want you to open up your Google Classroom again. I want you to go into the Reagan Domestic assignment, and then I want you to find the Equal Rights Amendment video. I want you to watch that real quick, okay? So go ahead and pause this, watch that video, and then we will pick up with the questions, okay? Okay, question number one. What was the goal of the Equal Rights Amendment? Who challenged it and why? And why did the Equal Rights Amendment fail? So, what was the goal of the Equal Rights Amendment? It says it right there in your reading. And then who challenged it? We talked about this lady very briefly just a moment ago. And why did she challenge it? What did she believe? What did she believe was the problem with the Equal Rights Amendment? And then why did the Equal Rights Amendment fail? So if you watch the video, you should be able to get the answer for number 3. Okay. So during the 60s, there's Betty Friedan right there, the feminist and political and social rights activist. During the 50s, she begins pushing for the Equal Rights Amendment during the late 60s and early 70s. This is Phyllis Schlafly, and she is lobbying against the Equal Rights Amendment. So under the Equal Rights Amendment, there is complete and 100% equality of rights under law. Okay, so what that means, for example, how would that affect women? Um, Job-wise, under the law, you would have equal opportunity to all forms of jobs, right? So you could compete against men, and by law, you are not to be discriminated against. We covered another amendment that does that, if anybody remembers what amendment that is. Um, and so we also kind of have to think about what sort of practical effects does this have. So if you look at these women right here, right now, if you are a male in the United States and you are over the age of 18, you have to sign up for the draft. And what that means is that if the military has to go to war and we need large troops very quickly, the government can force its citizens to go to war. And under the Equal Rights Amendment, that would apply to women as well. So what it does is it literally takes every law and it makes it gender neutral. So there's complete equality. Here's the video that I talked about. Make sure you have watched this video, the Equal Rights Amendment video. And then we are going to move on to the next section, Sandra Day O'Connor. Under that, there's a very brief description. Ronald Reagan nominated the first woman to the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor. Basically, she is a judge. She is nominated by Ronald Reagan, and she is confirmed by the Senate, and she becomes the first female Supreme Court justice to have ever served in the Supreme Court in American history. So if we look at her section here, it says, what does the Supreme Court do? Think about the function of the Supreme Court. What are they supposed to decide on? If you're not sure about what the Supreme Court does, I suggest you Google it. Number 2, why is her becoming Supreme Court Justice significant? What sort of barrier does she break? She's the first to do something. And we just said it in the reading up there. So if you need to reference your reading passage right above, do so now. Okay, so we're going to quickly jump to Reaganomics here. So if you need a second, go ahead and pause the video. Um, if you are ready, let's go ahead and move forward. Under Reaganomics, it says President Ronald Reagan believed he could tackle the problem of stagflation facing the American economy in the 1980s by reducing taxes and relaxing federal regulations so that producers, especially big business, would create a larger supply of goods. Reagan asked Congress to lower tax rates on businesses and wealthy individuals to encourage new economic investment because Reagan tried to solve the economic crisis by increasing supply of goods. Reaganomics is also called supply side economics. The really important thing here is this last passage. The degree of business regulation by the federal government decreased. So there's not as much red tape, right? So it makes opening a business much more it makes it much more accessible. It's easier. And to be honest with you, businesses at this point get a huge tax cut. So the idea of Reaganomics, right? The idea of Reaganomics is that degree of business regulation decreases, right? So we have a decrease in business regulation. What this does is it provides tax cuts for businesses, and the idea here is that businesses can hire more people and produce more goods as a result. So if you don't make businesses pay a lot of taxes, they have extra money, and that extra money can be used to hire more people and produce more goods. Now this happens. Tax cuts are seen, people open new businesses, businesses grow, they provide more supplies, and what we know about economics is that the more you produce, what happens to the price? The price lowers, right? And so that happens, and it helps the economy, but the problem with this is that it really only benefits one group of people. So let's look at the questions here. It says, which class of people were hurt by this plan and why? So let's think about it. If business owners get tax cuts, right, and they have leftover money, who's going to be making the majority of that profit? Is it going to be the business owners or the workers? So which class of people were hurt the most by this plan? Okay, and why? Number 2 says, which class of people in America benefited from this plan most and why? So these tax cuts for businesses, was it the business owners that benefited or was it the workers that benefited, and why? Why is Reaganomics called supply side economics? If you look back at the reading here, it tells you exactly why it's called supply side economics, right? And then summarize in 5 words or less. What is Reaganomics? So for the rest of this is independent practice. Make sure you read the Phyllis Schlafly article, and make sure you read the President Ronald Reagan quote here, and then make sure you answer those questions. So if you need help, if you need anything, please contact me. I'm going to put my information back up on the slide, okay? So pause the video right here if you need to. I'm going to pull up full screen here for a second so you can pause the video. That'll give you Google Classroom. It'll give you the account, the code class codes for each Google account period, Google Meets, attendance. It has my contact information there, Google Classroom. You can email me. You can go to Google Hangouts and Edmodo as well, of course, and then assignments and late work. Okay. So if you have any other questions, if there's anything you're confused about, please give me a shout, guys. Otherwise, have a fantastic day, and I will see you guys on Wednesday. Okay.